Good morning, good morning. This is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We broadcast here from Kingston. And then, of course, as you know, at 12 o'clock we're going to link with Irie Jam in New York. It's a new week. End of the month of May. Hurricane season begins next week. And we have already been alerted that this year is likely to see a more active hurricane season than normal. So we'll talk about that in some other program, but I think people better start preparing themselves. You know, things you can do. If you have trees in your yard, you need to prune the trees. The reason why pruning is so important is that when the tree is full of branches, and the breeze takes it, the whole tree sometimes comes down on top of your house. If you prune some of those branches, sort of thin it out, a lot of the breeze, when it hits it, will pass through and save you the damage. But that's for a subsequent discussion. Hurricane season starts Wednesday, 1st of June, so start preparing yourself. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. You don't have to be a parent and a grandparent like I am to have felt your stomach turn inside out last week at the murder of 19 10-year-old students in their classroom in Texas. What on earth could inspire an 18-year-old youth to arm himself with an AR-15 rifle and shoot 19 little children and 2 of their teachers, one by one? What could have motivated anybody to do that is beyond me. You know, this has become an all too frequent occurrence in the United States. Remember Columbine, where 13 people were killed? Sandy Hook, 26 children killed. Parkland in Florida, 17 killed. We have some horrendous murders in Jamaica. Like that 9-year-old autistic boy whose throat, Gabriel King was his name, his throat was slashed in a car in Montego Bay earlier this year. But we haven't experienced the scale of wickedness here in Jamaica of the kind that we saw happen in Texas last week. Not yet, at any rate. Not yet, thank God. But we have our own problems. We have one of the highest murder rates in the world. Last year, 1,463 people were murdered in Jamaica. Up to last week, Friday, the 27th of May, 594 people have been murdered since the start of this year. 39 more than for the same period last year. Violent crime and murder in particular are perhaps the most serious problem plaguing Jamaica. If you are to fix a problem, you need to find out what is causing the problem. Otherwise, you will be forever trying to fix the problem, but only to discover that you're simply treating the symptoms, not the problem itself. And the problem will not go away. You will simply be trying and scratching your head as to why the problem is so stubborn. This problem has been studied and analyzed by some of the best brains in Jamaica. One of those is Professor Anthony Harriott, Professor of Political Sociology and Director of the Institute of Criminal Justice and Security at the University of the West Indies. In one of his publications, he provided some important statistics relating to murders in Jamaica. His study found that 79%, 79, that's almost 8 out of every 10, 79% of the murders in Jamaica had to do with gang violence. 14% was attributed to criminal activity that is not gang related. That is like, murders committed in the course of a robbery or contract killing or extortion or crime of passion. And then he estimated that there were 6% of the murders were due to domestic disputes, which I imagine would include the crime of passion. But domestic disputes, quarrel between people who live in the same house or live in the same, community, people are friends and so on. Gang violence is therefore by far the main cause of murders in Jamaica, and this has been confirmed by Police Commissioner Anthony Anderson. If we know that that is the primary source cause of murders, how do we fix it? There are some, indeed many, who believe that you have to fight fire with fire. Hard, lethal policing is what they recommend, to find the gang members and eliminate them, or neutralize them, as they say in law enforcement language. Others argued that we have been doing that for years and it hasn't worked. The murder rate keeps climbing higher and higher. The police estimate that there are almost 400 violent criminal gangs operating in Jamaica. Some of them are very large, with networks. So you don't find them located in one place. They have tentacles and branches in different communities, sometimes in different parishes. Some of them are pretty small, operating more at a kind of community level. I had a discussion recently with a retired, very senior police officer, who is now retired, who argues that criminal gangs have become an industry. Industry. That's like manufacturing, retail business, agriculture, mining. It's an industry. It's an economic sphere of activity. These gangs, he says, are formed with an economic motive. They need to eat a food. Their activities include robbery, housebreaking, extortion, scamming, and that involves murder. A businessman who refuses to pay extortion money is murdered so as to send a signal to the other businessmen that they had better pay up or else they will murder them too. When they rob somebody or break into a house, they may decide to murder them to make sure that there is nobody there who can turn up at any ID parade. But he tells me, this retired senior police officer, that many of the murders have to do with gang-on-gang violence, because he says it's an industry. And in that industry there's competition. One gang finds that another gang is targeting the same businessman to extort him. They're turning up at the same construction site to demand money. They're breaking into the same houses, so when the other gang goes there, there is nothing left to steal because the other gang gone with it. They are getting hold of the same scamming list. So when they call up this low lady in America to tell her how much money she has won in a lotto, they discover that that woman has already been shaken down and she's not prepared to send any more money. So one gang decides that it has to get rid of the other gang because it is humbugging its eater food business. How do we fix that? Some well-meaning patriots insist that what we need to do is that we need to get into the communities, to get a dialogue going with the people in the communities, to find a way to diffuse conflicts, to introduce them to things like mediation, to wean them off the criminal activity and point them towards a better way to eat our food. The Peace Management Initiative that was formed more than 20 years ago, I think, is one such effort. It has benefited from government funding through the Citizen Security and Justice Program, as well as from funding from international agencies. Then there's the Violence Prevention Alliance, a UN-sponsored program with pretty much similar objectives. How effective have these interventions been? The Augustown community, where the PMI, the Peace Management Initiative, was heavily involved, became a kind of poster child of this type of intervention. The UWI, whose Mona campus adjoins Augustown, built a whole project around it, involving notables like the late Professor Barry Chavans and Mr. Horace Levy, who we hope to talk with on the program later. I remember one of the leaders in the Augustown community, Kenneth Wilson, frequently being interviewed on radio relating to the achievements of the program. But Augustown seemed to have, it went through a period, when there was almost no violence in Augustown that was reported. But in more recent times, it seems to have suffered a relapse. Is it that the effort was misconceived? Is it that the effort may have made an initial impact but could not be sustained? Was it a lack of funding? Was it a lack of support from the broader society, including like the private sector, to go in and see to what extent they can help to provide opportunities for employment and so on? What has been the experience in other communities? A concerted effort was made in the Montego Bay area in communities like Flankers and Granville. Have they fared any better? The Minister of National Security, Dr. Horace Chang, has expressed more than reservations about these social intervention efforts. He seems to think that they have not worked, that they have not been effective, that they have not provided value for the money that was spent on them. But then what is the alternative? What is the role of social intervention in trying to reduce the high rate of violent crime? I recall many years ago, more than 20 years ago, I had a discussion with Mr. Lee Brown. He served as police commissioner for New York. And after he gave up that position, he was on a visit to Jamaica, and I had the pleasure of meeting with him. When he took up that position, New York was experiencing an alarming level of crime, including murders. But under his watch, violent crime and murders declined significantly. So I asked him, how did he manage to accomplish that? And he walked me through the strategies that he pursued, including community policing, community dialogue to improve the relationship between the police and the citizens. And he mentioned intervention by the state and local governments to provide better amenities in the community, clean up the garbage, build some community centers, put in street lights, fix the broken sewage, things like that. As well as to provide better opportunities for training and employment for the unemployed youth in those communities. And then when I asked him, well, of all of these efforts, which one you think was the most effective, the most important, the one that had the greatest impact? And he said without hesitation that it was the programs implemented by the state and local government to improve conditions in the violence-prone communities and to provide new opportunities for their young people. And he mentioned the figure. I don't recall what it was, but it was a tidy sum of money that both the city government, state government, local government, I think the federal government may very well have been involved, but the various levels of government, a considerable amount of money that they spent on these efforts, so that while he was doing his policing, it was supported by a considerable effort to, in their view, to address the root cause. Now, New York is now back around, the pendulum has swung again because New York is now facing a serious crime problem. But bear in mind, I'm talking about Lee Brown was there 20-odd years ago, no? Back in the late 1990s. Now, the late Edward Seaga famously said that it takes cash to care. And what Lee Brown was saying is that it takes cash to fix the problem of violent crime. Where does this place us in Jamaica? Is it that we're going to have to wait until we have enough money to invest that level of resources to fix our crime problem? And when will we ever have that kind of money? There are other issues. What kind of opportunity will we ever be able to offer a youth that can be more attractive to him than what he can earn from scamming? A smart scammer is able to own a brand new BMW at the age of 21. What kind of training, what kind of job opportunity can we provide that can compete with that? Today we want to delve into these issues, reducing our alarming level of violent crime. What can be done to transform these communities where violent crime is a way of life, and those who are not involved live in brutal hell because they don't know when they will be a victim, intentional or not, of this kind of jungle life? That's what we're talking about today. And I'm very pleased to welcome to the program my first guest. And I'm talking about Mr. Paul Teeple, who is the Chief of Party at the USAID Positive Pathways. Mr. Teeple?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Welcome to the program. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You would have had experience, I'm sure, in other countries in seeking to address some of the root causes of violence and trying to find the antidote. We are confronted with a mountain of frustration because we have had a number of initiatives, peace management initiative being one, the Violence Prevention Alliance being another, and there are others. We have had a number of initiatives. We have spent not an inconsiderable amount of resources trying to get them up and running and trying to keep them going. But I don't think I'm being cynical if I were to say that somehow they don't seem to be producing the results that we desire. Is that peculiar to us? Is it that there's something we're not doing right, or this is generally part of the uphill climb that you are found in other countries?
I would say the latter, sir. I think violence prevention is a complex issue, whether the issue is, most of my experience has been in Central America and in the Caribbean. And so in Central America, the issue is very much tied to economic conditions, tied to very formal gangs, where here there are some differences. There are gangs maybe not as formal and as multinational as some of the gangs to our west. But these are complex issues. They have to do with history. They have to do with family makeup. They have to do with how people see themselves, access to education, access to jobs. And so while I share your frustration, I think we all do, that with all the many initiatives that we've worked on throughout the years, and we've all tried to contribute in many ways. It's difficult to see the progress at times, but yet I think we do see progress, but it's also a challenge to maintain that progress and to have everybody working together in a partnership. And I noticed you were talking about, leading into this, talking about police working with social interventions. And I believe that's such a key part of the solution, is having effective and ongoing partnerships between government and civil society, between police and the social interventions to make lasting change.
Do you find how long have you been here with us in Jamaica?
I've been in Jamaica this time about just over a year and a half. But I've been coming to Jamaica off and on for over 20 years.
From your objective observation, do you feel that we are too impatient, that we give up too easily, that we're not persistent in our efforts?
Oh, I wouldn't say that, sir. I know many people here in Jamaica who've dedicated their lives, and you mentioned some of the folks earlier, the leaders of VPA and others. Just yesterday, I spent a wonderful afternoon with the leaders in Salt Spring in St. James, and I was really moved by the commitment of people. And I know that some of the people I met there yesterday just have, this isn't something they do for a season. They dedicate their lives to this, and so that's my perspective on this, of seeing and meeting so many people who've dedicated their lives to it, and they realize that these are, long-term issues. In my country, as you pointed out, we had periods where violence went down, and unfortunately now violence is going up. We can't give up on it, and every day more people are turning 14, 15, 16, 17, and they need support.
Well, help me, Mr. Teeple. I don't know what your academic discipline is. Mine is in economics, so I'm not really qualified to delve into this. But help me out. I look at a country. We recently had the president of Rwanda here. And because he was coming, I took some time to do a little read-up on Rwanda. Rwanda, as you know, went through an awful civil war, the scars of which are still quite visible. Rwanda, the majority of people in Rwanda are much poorer than those in Jamaica. I mean, our per capita income is way above theirs. Because of the civil war, I imagine that there is no shortage of weapons in Rwanda lying around somewhere. And yet it is one of the most peaceful countries in Africa. There's a senator here whose husband was the UNDP country manager there, and she lived there for 5 years. And she said you could walk the streets in Kigali at 2 o'clock in the morning without fear. And I'm trying to wrap my head around that to find out what is wrong with us. Where did we pick up this disease from?
That's a good question. I wouldn't want to pass this type of judgment as a non-Jamaican on to answer your question directly. But I know that the causes of violence are systemic. It's generational. What we're looking at is destruction of families. We're looking at too many young people being raised on the streets instead of in caring homes. And in the homes where they're raised, do the parents have the skills that they need, or are they raised by caregivers who are able to help young people navigate the difficulties of managing their anger? Do the actions they take, does the education they receive, does the job opportunities that they see in front of them provide them with hope, or do they frustrate them? Do they learn violence at home versus learning to be careful, be caring, and so those are the things that I think are part of this long-term systemic issues that unfortunately can get worse from one generation to another.
I understand what you're saying, because in my years in representational politics, I represented some communities where violence is a way of life. And one of the things I found there is that from a very early age, kids, I grew up in old-fashioned rural Jamaica, 70 years ago. And I was taught at school, at home, in church, you were given a kind of grounding as to values, what is right and what is wrong. And it didn't mean that you wouldn't do things that are wrong, but when you were doing the things that are wrong, you jolly well knew that you were doing something that was wrong, and you were taking a risk and recognizing that you may have to face the consequences. One of the problems I find is that we have young people growing up, and you and I would have difficulty understanding their concept of what is right and what is wrong. How do you fix that?
You engage them, you listen to them, you provide them with mentoring, you provide them with safe spaces, you work with the police so that the police can be seen as their friend and not someone that they should be scared of. You provide their teachers with the training to deal with persons who've been raised in households where there's a lot of trauma. You help them be referred to the higher levels of care if they need it. It's multi-pronged, and we work in some of those same communities through USAID's Positive Pathways program in Kingston, St. Andrews. We work in Denhamtown, Hannahtown, and Jonestown. And my experience there is, yes, these are tough conditions, but I've also met some wonderful people there who are really trying to make things different and make things better. And what works is when we talk to them, listen to them about what it is they're interested in, and work with the young people to listen to the young people instead of telling them what they need, asking them what they're interested in, what they want. How can we work together and listen to their ideas and provide them with safe spaces to work these things out? I think my upbringing is a rural, very safe upbringing in the United States, and I had safe places and to work through whatever issues I was dealing with and persons I could talk to, and I didn't have to deal with half of the issues of a young person growing up in Jonestown or Denhamtown today. And so I think it's this combination of support systems that makes a difference.
But don't we face another pitfall, though, in the sense that in order for the program to be effective, it requires resources, a considerable amount of resources. And in spite of the assistance we have gotten, I'm sure, from USAID and from European Union and other bilateral and multilateral partners, it is never enough. Is it that because of the inadequacy of the resources, we're spreading ourselves too thin? We're trying to do too much with too little? Perhaps what we ought to do is to be more focused and see if we can get 6 communities straightened out and thinking right, rather than trying to do 60.
That is, I believe, is a good process, a good way to look at it. So what we did with the USAID Positive Pathways program was, in our first 3 or 4 months with this project, we did a survey of different communities, and we chose 12 where we would focus our resources on. So we have 3 communities in Kingston, St. Andrew, 3 in St. Catherine, 3 in Clarendon, 3 in St. James. So to avoid that spreading of resources too thin, and to be able to focus. And so what this is allowing us to do now is to build deeper relationships with the community development committees, with the benevolent societies, with the school leaders, with the police, and hopefully bring about change. And I'm hoping that the evidence that we generate can then be translated to be used in other communities. But I agree with you; it requires focus.
How do we deal with another problem in earlier days in trying to address this problem? And one of the solutions, of course, would be trying to create opportunity for these young people, no? Which involve training and employment opportunities and so on. I'm sorry, but today, a lot of the violence has to do with high-value crime. So you're dealing with a lot of scamming, where people are making hundreds and thousands of dollars. There's no kind of training and opportunity you can provide, and people that can compete with that. How are we going to manage there? I mean, why wouldn't he say to us, well, look, you got try that with who want that, but that can help me to drive a BMW. And I know if I spend 6 months in this scamming business, I can drive 2 BMWs. How do you compete with that?
I think it starts first with training, guidance, and values. And while social intervention programs are not going to be able to address the issue of illegal scamming, and so those are activities that need to be addressed by governments to make it more difficult, to decrease the incentives and the availability. But at the same time, we need to work with young people on the values, because we all choose a path. And whether we choose a path of something that's legal, or we choose a path that's something that's illicit, we choose a harder, longer path that may not pay us as much, but that represents values that are important within our family, within our faith, within our nation. I think we have to get back to some of those issues of working with young people, helping them talk through, so that they all face choices. I think we all face choices in our lives about, do I do this the right way, or do I do it the other way, or another way, and what is it that guides us to make that? It's our faith, it's our family, it's our belief and shared values within our country. And so I think we have to help provide those spaces within our communities so that young people can develop those values. So they make choices, and we have to help them see and provide them with a base that they can make a healthy choice.
One of the cities in your country that has been wrestling with this kind of problem is Chicago. Do you know what efforts are being made there and how effective those efforts have been? Maybe we could borrow some of the tricks that they are using.
I'm not so familiar with what's going on in Chicago right now, but I know a lot of activities that I'm familiar with focus on engagement with gang members and trying to listen to gang members and to build trust and to help provide a pathway, an alternative pathway. I remember seeing a story of a program in Chicago last year where some people were they were getting out on sailboats and teaching young students who socially, economically would never have access to a sailboat or rowing it was. And they developed rowing teams, and they started competing with the police. So young people who were seeing the police in the past as their enemy, and police who had no concept of perhaps what's going on in a young person's life, started rowing on the river there in Chicago. And by doing that, they start to build relationships. They start to trust. And more of these young men finish high school and go on to the university as a result of that. So that's the kind of success that we need, is this of positive engagements. And I want to come back to what I saw yesterday in Salt Spring. So we supported, through USA's Positive Pathways, we supported a very small activity in Salt Spring. It was a football tournament that used alternative dispute resolution as part of it. So about 7 different teams formed, and on Sundays they would get together and play. And then the person who was a specialist in alternative dispute resolution would show up each Sunday, talk with the young people, the young men, before the games, during the games, after the games, about controlling their emotions, about how do you resolve this. Through this, he's seeing now opportunities to talk more about masculinity, because very few of these young men have had positive male role models and do not understand the concepts of what it truly is to be a male. That being a male does not imply that you should be violent. That it's not always about respect and standing up to fight for my respect, but you can be a male by turning the other cheek, by holding your emotions. And he's seeing some really interesting progress. And so yesterday we celebrated with the police, with members of the faith community, with the CDC, with the SDC, and there were probably 200 people from the community, children playing in the field, and things. They said, we never see this before.
Have we ever thought, Mr. Teeple, have we ever thought of maybe asking an agency like yours, USAID, to see if we can identify some reform gang leaders, gang members, people who have, straightened up and are now leading useful, productive lives. Trying to bring a few of them here and getting them into the communities for them to go talk with some of these gangsters themselves. Just to sometimes we're more influenced by our peers than we are by people who we think may be talking down to us. I wonder if that is something that we should pursue.
Well, it's something that we are considering an initiative within our program that will work with some ex-gang members and persons who've been incarcerated, either as juveniles or adults. And so we hope to be able to announce something more about that very soon. But another part of our program that we're working on is a concept called positive deviance. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that concept.
No, I haven't.
But positive deviance is looking at persons who, while they have access to the same resources as everyone else in their community, which in many times means they have the same limited resources of everyone else, these persons who, while most people may have a negative pathway, these persons have a positive pathway. And we're about to start an inquiry or a study on this to see if we can identify some commonalities about this. And in other countries and other positive deviant studies, what you might find is that in this community there is a teacher who has a unique approach, and she or he is doing things not with more money, but it's just the way they greet their students, it's the way they engage their students, and therefore those students are staying in schools. Or there's an example in the United States of a police officer and the way that he engages. There's a positive deviant study that comes out of Vietnam that looks at how mothers increased the nutrition value based feeding children pieces of food that other mothers were discarding. Completely healthy, wonderful food, but that they increase the nutritional value. And so what this is a positive deviance. It's a deviation from a norm that we can look at, and we can identify those behaviors that can make change. And in the process, it's important to not glorify the person, but to glorify the behavior, because we want to be able to replicate that. So, and we know that there are young people in every community in Jamaica that, despite all the odds against them, have turned out to be outstanding citizens and productive in every way. And what can we learn from them and share with others? And as you say, it's peers. And whether it's and there are young people who have been able to make the successful transition from gangs, from trauma, and we do need to collect those stories and share. And you're right, people learn more. And as an outsider, it's one of the big lessons I'm continually learning here is that my job is to really help Jamaicans learn from Jamaicans, not from my experiences.
Yeah. Mr. Paul Teeple, Chief of Party at USAID, Positive Pathways. Thank you so much for joining me today. I found your contribution very, very instructive and very valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Golden.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're talking about violence prevention. And we're very, very pleased to have joined us for this discussion Mr. Horace Levy. Horace, are you there?
I'm here, Bruce. Thank you.
Welcome to the program. You have been a pioneer, a pilgrim in this business of social intervention, community engagement, dispute resolution. You've been about the business of growing the peace. Tell me, are you immune to frustration?
Somewhat, yes.
Because
it's been a very frustrating journey.
What's your assessment of all of the efforts that you know, many of them you yourself have been involved in, others that you know about? What's your assessment as to what impact they have made? Is it that there's something that we're not doing right? Is it that we're not persistent enough? Is it that we're not putting in the required resources, which would include financial resources, but I imagine there are other resources that it would require as well. The problem of violent crime isn't getting any better. What's wrong?
It's a combination of the things that you have said. We're not doing the right thing. We're not putting in the resources, and we're not persisting in doing the right thing. So it's a combination, and the moment is a very difficult one for that reason. Very difficult. And it's hard to see how it's going to improve in the near future, frankly, because of those factors. I need to make clear one thing to you, though, before I go any further. That is that I had resigned. I resigned from the Peace Management Initiative almost 3 years ago, just short of 3 years. So I'm not in a very good position to fill out much about them. I can say some things because I do have some information about it, and I've been probing and trying to get more information, but I am limited in that respect. And I say that because the PMI has been one of the central efforts, one of the central planks, I should say, in my own efforts to do something about the River of Peace that it started and tried to keep going.
Well, tell me, Horace, and I know you were heavily involved there. Augustown once seemed to have emerged as a model, as a template, that if we could just replicate that across the island. And then it seems to have slipped. What went wrong?
Mainly what went wrong was that the PMI, which was instrumental in bringing it forward and getting a peace treaty about 14 years ago now, was unable to continue in there, which has been the fate of PMI in many communities. We carry them so far, and we know very well that we alone can't do it, that other elements have to come into it, important other elements, and we ourselves are limited, PMI has been, by the kinds of funding we have received and the limited funding. So having done what we did in Augustown, we had to withdraw. And in the meantime, while in the period there that followed when we had withdrawn, other elements were doing their things. Some of the people who we had quieted or who had themselves pulled back came back in. So it's not a static situation at all. Things change continuously, very dynamic. and we are unable to persist. We ourselves have been, not only in Augustown, but in a number of other places where we had similar success. We have been unable to persist for lack of funding, because of the sporadic nature of our funding, the unevenness of it. It comes and goes, it stops and starts. Funders have particular things they want done, and we try to satisfy those, and so on. So funding has been a major problem for PMI all along. And that's part of the reason for the slip back, a large part of it, unfortunately.
But is it not possible, Horace, that we're looking at a situation like when your doctor says to you, I'm putting you on Resilo to deal with your blood pressure, and you're going to be on that for the rest of your life. Are we in a position where we dare not pull the plug? Because these communities, if we are to hold them together, we're going to have to stay there. And if we have to stay there, how many communities are we going to be able to treat? In other words, at which point does a community get to a stage where its peace management becomes almost self-sustainable?
Mm-hmm. It only reaches that point when and if the problem is rightly diagnosed and rightly remedied. And that diagnosis has not been carried out. The diagnosis is that crime prevention is not first and foremost a gang thing. It's a community thing. It's a community thing. The gangs, yes, they have to be dealt with. There's no question about it, and police are the ones to deal with them. But that's on the surface. The fact of the matter is that gangs are the result of community deprivation, underdevelopment of people at a community level. And as long as that's going on, people in there, some of them, for their own survival, are going to pursue the gang route. So the way to address the whole thing is to address the community situations, underdevelopment. And this has to be addressed not on a one-one, just inner city, Kingston, or inner city, Montego Bay. It has to be addressed today across the island. Violence is not a city thing any longer. It's rural as well.
Yeah, well, forgive me, Horace, and I really want you to help me with this, because I'm earnestly trying to see if I can get a better understanding. The Augustown that I used to know when I was on campus in the 60s, it had its experience of poverty and all that at that time. It didn't have this problem of criminality. What is it that was there in the 60s that is not there anymore? Or what is there that is what is it that is there now that never used to be there in the 60s? I'm just trying to see if I can understand what it is that has caused these communities to deteriorate in the way that they have, to the point where there's no sense of right and wrong, there's no respect for elders, the kind of socialization that I was accustomed to when I was growing up, and I suspect you yourself, that kind of socialization doesn't exist anymore. When I was a little boy growing up in Old Harbour, if I'm on the street and my shirt is out of my pants and I see Inspector McLean coming, I tuck it in my pants very quickly, because if I don't, he's going, by the time I get home, my parents going, no, and that's wrong. Where did we go off the rail?
We went off the rail by not recognizing the changes taking place in poorer communities, that they were not being treated on the basis of equality with the middle class. And initially it was urban. That's where it was taking place in the beginning. It wasn't rural. They were not being treated on a footing of equality with the better off classes, right? And they felt this. They perceived this. They were not being respected. They were not being treated fairly. And so there was a deterioration in their perception of how they were, in the way they were being treated, their perception of it. It grew. It wasn't static. It was not static. there were gradual changes in what was happening in terms of the wealth of the country and how it was being distributed. The inequality grew, Bruce. The inequality grew. And as a result of that growth of inequality, people began to seek methods of survival. That was it. Methods of survival. And some of those methods were not happy methods at all. They were very ugly methods. But, what we do is the only way we can survive is to do this and to do that. We can't just follow the legal route all the time. We have to create my own way. And so the formation. And you see, some of it happened naturally, gradually, because youth naturally form groups, male youth especially, but female too. And they form these groups, and the groups begin to, partly because of political partisanship, the parties aligned particular communities, each to itself, the PNP and the JLP. And within those communities were antagonistic to one another. And these groups of youth inside of them took on themselves the task of defending my PNP or my JLP community. They were loyal to it. And they wanted to help the politician who was running for office win his office. And so that spontaneous grouping grew into a rivalry which began to use weapons. It was a very natural growth, very spontaneous. And that growth grew into, and because they were being funded and weaponized by the parties, literally, Bruce, both parties, there wasn't any question about it, right? That spontaneous thing grew into a kind of gang warfare. I don't call it, it wasn't the Dudas type. It was a youth group type, corner crews we called them initially, because their intention was not to trade in guns or to extort. It was to defend their communities. Are you there with me, or have I lost you?
No, I'm listening. We're coming up on the break, and there are two things that I wanted to ask you about. Firstly, from your experience working in these communities, is there an absence of leadership? And by that I mean the kind of leadership that could be with guidance. Because in all of these social movement issues, leadership is critical. Is there the kind of leadership that could be made transformative?
There is some of that. But bear in mind that a lot of that leadership was older people, teacher, pastor, older policemen, and so on. And the youth were not necessarily going to listen to them. They weren't going to church, right? There was a drift away from that kind of leadership. And they began to create their own leadership, to develop their own values, their own norms, because they had to deal with their own ways of survival, economic survival. It was elementary, right? Just to live, right? To bring in enough money. And they couldn't take the small amounts of money. I mean, we've seen recently that minimum wage is a joke compared to what the real need is for a family to survive. And that was affecting everybody in the inner city. So, leadership to some extent is there, has been there, but a lot of it has lost its leadership capacity, and other leaders have come up. Right?
Are you familiar with any other country that has faced similar problems and has done better than we have? Have you been able to identify what made the difference so that perhaps we could try and learn?
Part of our problem here is that we're so close to the United States, that the example of living in the States drives a lot of the thinking in the inner city, right? The kind of movies, the television shows, and so on that they have been seeing. And so in the harder they come, for example, you get examples of that. But that's across the board. So our situation is in some respects unique. It's not the situation in India. They're far away from the United States, right? They don't have that example in front of them. Our youth had this in front of them, the migration, attraction, and all the rest, and the family up there, and wanting to live the big and so on, big life. So, there is a certain special condition here that's not present elsewhere. So it's a complex picture, a very complex picture, affecting education, affecting family life, affecting the treatment by police, by the state. It's a holistic picture.
Horace, we have me scratch your service that I'm in trouble because I'm up on the 12 o'clock break.
Yes,
but can I thank you so much for joining me? I couldn't have done this program without getting your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99, and we're going to be linking with Irish Jam in New York very shortly. Talking with Beauregard. He's not there yet. No, I haven't joined with him. I think he has some housekeeping matters he has to do at this time. But today we're talking about violence prevention, and we're looking at the efforts that have been made through various initiatives, like the Peace Management Initiative, the Violence Prevention Alliance, a number of other programs. We had a discussion earlier with Mr. Paul Teeple of the USAID, who is particularly engaged in providing assistance to us in these intervention measures. And of course, we just spoke before we took the 12 o'clock break. We spoke with Mr. Horace Levy, one of the initiators of this effort way back in the 1990s. And he gave us his own perspective on it, both from a historical point of view, in terms of what the origins are, but also in terms of how to deal with it. And he raised some very serious questions, because if at the root of it is the question of economic survival, and economic survival that is influenced by a sense of deprivation, inequality, a feeling that the society is looking after other people and not looking after you. So you have to look after yourself, and you have to find whatever means you can to look after yourself. And in finding those means, you're not guided by anybody else's values. Nobody tell me what is right and what is wrong, because that can put pot on fire. I have to do what I have to do, because I have 3 youth here that I have to look about. So if I can make a money this way, nobody tell me that it's wrong. My only challenge is to see whether or not I can do it and don't get caught if it is illegal. But then now that leads you into another kind of situation where you run into collision now with some other people who believe that you are interfering with the food that they're supposed to be eating. So you get into an argument there, so. And next thing, either you kill him or him kill you, because you're in each other's way. And then there has to be some retaliation, and before you know what happened, the whole of that community is in conflagration and fire. Going there after dark and the place look like a ghost yard, because nobody don't want to push out them head out of the door, because the place is just paralyzed with violent crime. And that is happening in so many communities. Police said there's almost 400 gangs operating in Jamaica. They operate somewhere. And can you imagine what life is like in those communities where they operate? Do we have Beauregard on now? Bo? Not there yet. All right, we'll link with him a little later. But I gather we have online now Pastor Richard Keane, do we? Pastor Keane.
Sir.
Pastor Keane, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, sir.
Boy, I have to confess, if I see you now, I don't remember what you look like.
Still red, still red.
How have you been?
I've been good, sir. And yourself?
I give thanks every day. Every
Yes,
day.
sir.
Tell me,
Yes, sir.
peace management.
Yes, sir.
Are we fighting a lost cause, or is there still room for success?
I don't think we're fighting a lost cause, but I think the battle is going to be a long one
Why?
for us to
Why is it so hard?
because of the mindset that has already been in the hearts and minds of so many, especially the young people. And it's going to take a time for us to change that mindset.
You know, I don't want to sound sort of brutal, but sometimes I wonder, is it, Pastor, whether or not we may not have to take a very fatalistic point of view and say, listen, we just have to draw a line somewhere. There's no point in trying to see if we can turn these people around. Maybe we need to start with little young ones, them now that just coming off the breast, and see if we can create a whole new generation of people who understand what life is and understand how living together ought to be, and understand that we should be our brother's keepers. Are we at that point, or we mustn't give up?
No, well, that is the point that we need to be at, because, in fact, after a young person has been living in a particular lifestyle for 5-10 years, it takes something significant to happen to them for them to change their way of thinking. So really and truly, if we begin with the babe off the breast, and that's why I said it's going to take a long time.
A whole generation, perhaps.
Yes, because the children now, I mean, we have children now at 7 and 8 who, when you speak to them, are just blatantly rude and out of order. They have no respect for adults. They have no respect for you trying to guide them in the right way.
But tell me, I mean, when I grew up, I grew up in my early years, partly in the country and partly in town. But when I grew up, there were certain pillars that held up the society that I was growing up in. The church being one, the school being another, the family being a third.
Yes.
And you went from one to the other, and each of them was instilling in you a kind of compass that said, over here is wrong, over here is right. So you from an early age, you had an understanding as to how you should live, which never, I mean, it don't mean that I never used to bad thing. I used to thief out from home and go to matinee down at the Luke State and Spanish Town Road, where I shouldn't go. But when I was doing it, I knew that it was wrong.
That's right.
I was taking a risk, and if I got caught, I knew that there was punishment that I had to face. Those pillars don't seem to exist at the community level anymore. And I say that very disappointed, Pastor, because I was amazed and quite encouraged that, I mean, when I was active, I'm retired now, but when I was active and I used to go to churches, particularly the evangelical churches and the Pentecostal churches, I was so pleasantly surprised to see the involvement of young people in the church. Yeah. And they were not just taken to church by their parents. They seemed to have functions in the church. They were assigned duties and so on. But that don't seem to be impacting the community. It's almost as if the church now is a kind of bubble. That, we retreat to that bubble, but in the community now, that's a whole different way of life altogether. Is it as bad as that?
Well, I think that the church has probably lost a little edge with the young people because they may not have changed in terms of how they flex with the young people, how they speak to them, how they get them involved in the things that are right, and how they teach these things. And so the young people are not going to church. They would rather go anywhere else but to a church. And that's very unfortunate because, as you said, the church was a solid foundation in our younger days, So the challenge really for the church today is to become relevant to the young people
that are in our communities, which means we may have to change our music. Not the content, but the beat, probably, and the involvement of the children in music.
Are we doing enough, Pastor? And I'm asking this question because I know of the kind of work that your church does. But are the churches generally doing enough to make this crossover? In other words, are we making sufficient use of the Carleen Davises of this world and the Downswells of this world and the Lieutenant Stitches of this world to see if we can find a new, more effective vehicle to begin to plant some seeds of values and uprightness?
Yeah.
Are we doing enough of that, or is the church in one society and the communities in another?
No, I do believe that there are churches that are moving in this direction, and but they are probably not as many as they ought to be, and so the few that are doing it will have to be, how should I say, be more aggressive in their work and in their visibility, especially with the presence of the internet platforms. The church has to enter into that phase so that they can reach more people. People who would not come into church must now hear the church in an effective way, producing a music that they will listen to with the lyrics that are life-changing and not a negative vibes. You know?
To what extent is our effectiveness compromised because we all seem to be operating in our own lanes? What I'm trying to get at is this. This kind of problem is so deep-rooted, has such historical antecedents, that and it is so multifaceted, both in its causes and in its manifestations, that perhaps we need to see a kind of partnership between the government, the churches, the schools, the communities, a kind of partnership the likes of which we have never seen before. So that a community must now feel that it is not surrounded, but that it now has available to it a consortium of interests that can be more effective in terms of their intervention, can be more effective in terms of the direction in which they try to move the community. It seems to me that we perhaps dissipate our efforts. If the church is trying a thing, the government has a little social intervention program, it is trying a thing. Everybody trying a thing, but somehow the violent behavior is getting worse.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Sir Bruce, that we need this kind of united effort where the church doesn't stand alone and try and do it alone, that indeed they must move with the other groupings, with the government and the other agencies, that we must come together so that we present the righteousness of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the Word of God in the schools, in the community, in our social interactions. I mean, when something happens in a community, I'm surprised that sometimes, unfortunately, they open in prayer. But after that, what the DJ play is something else, and what happens is something else. So it's really a form, and we need to get away from that form to the reality of establishing what love is, what good manners are, how we should relate to each other in love and not in aggression. All of these things need to be retaught in a different way.
But how does that address the issue, though, that Horace Levy spoke about? And I'm sure you know Horace well.
Yes.
How does that address the issue that he spoke about, that a lot of these people have turned to deviant behavior? They don't consider it to be any deviance, but they have turned to their particular lifestyle, their particular way of doing things, because they have to eat a food. And left to the society alone, they will never eat a food.
That's right. Well, there you go again. And the church needs to be very active and have the ability to assist. Because, one thing that Jesus was concerned about was the people that were hungry, And when the disciples said, send them, let them go buy food, Jesus said, no, man, you feed them. You see? But our churches probably have not had the financial backing that enables them to enter into a community and assist in that area while they begin to teach the principles of righteousness.
Well, I know Jesus fed the multitude, but he didn't do it for a week. What we have to do is not to give them the food to eat, but we have to find a way to make sure that they can provide food for themselves.
Oh yeah.
And we seem, the thing that worries me, and this is why I sound so frustrated. When I was in politics, a neighboring MP remarked to me once that he spent a lot of time making representations for a skills training center in his constituency.
Yeah.
And it was built at a fair amount of cost.
Yeah.
Well equipped with brand new state-of-the-art equipment.
Yeah.
With, I think, 12 instructors. And he said that after 3 months, there's only 2 students enrolled.
Because they haven't had a change of mindset. They
weren't interested in becoming no electrician or no plumber or no carpenter or no mason or no welder. Because
I'm agreeing with you. Because I've seen that in communities that I work in, where we set up a training center and we cannot even get the people who need to be trained to come for training.
Well, the problem is worse than many of us realize.
It is. And it's going to have to happen, Sir Bruce, on a one-on-one basis, unfortunately, where we interact with people on a one-on-one basis and bring that change in mindset so that they could take it back to their families and to their friends.
Well, I find myself being dragged reluctantly to this view that maybe there's an MP who referred to someone one time as irredeemable, And I'm just wondering, whether we don't have to sell it, no? We don't name Jesus Christ. We can't fix this. But what we can do is make sure that those who are being born today at Victoria Jubilee, make sure that they are given the kind of opportunities and the kind of care and the kind of mentoring that will make sure that they don't end up in this rut.
That is it. And so, you see, we have to, we talk about mentoring and all of that, but mentoring has to be just not that. It has to be the loving care of individuals. You have to invest in a family, for example, and bring that family so that others can see that the choices that this family has made has brought a productive lifestyle with children who respect authority and with children who, when they grow up, seek to go into strong relationships in terms of marriage so that the family unit, because that's where the problem is. There's no family unit. And therefore, the ability to train and to develop right thoughts and right relationships becomes very difficult. So we're going to have to start with the young ones, and we're going to have to see how best we can touch the parents that do exist, simply because do you know that that parents will come to church just because their children are involved in some kind of play or in some kind of musical presentation, and the parents will come out at that time. So if you get the children doing this thing and you start to teach the children, the parents can come, and the parents, some of them, you won't get all of them, but some of them will convert. And that's the process, and that's why it's going to take time.
Pastor Kane, thanks for coming on today, and thanks for helping us trying to see if we can understand not just the problem, but also to understand how we can tackle it. Thank you so much.
Thanks ever so much for having me on.
Good.
Thank
you. Beauregard.
Mr. Goldie.
Big man, I hope you have some solutions, because my brain is getting a little overwhelmed. This problem of violent crime, it plaguing us down here. Bad.
Yes.
What we're talking about, the topic today was violence prevention, no? And we've been talking about the kind of initiatives that we have been trying over the last 20, 30 years through Peace Management Initiative, Violence Prevention Alliance, the churches. But we don't seem to be making any success, you know. The situation don't seem to be getting any better. I even asked Mr. Mr. Teeple, who is here with the USAID, I asked him whether or not he was familiar with what was happening in places like Chicago, because they have had a problem. I don't know if they have been able to kind of dent the problem, and if so, what it is that they did. But we perhaps need to look at some other countries that have tackled this problem and have been successful, and to see whether or not we can borrow from them. What is happening in New York? Because I know New York had a big crime problem one time, and then it subsided. I believe it is beginning to erupt again. What is the situation up there?
Well, we have been seeing a spike in a lot of things that are happening when it comes to crime here in the United States, especially in New York City. A lot of mass shootings taking place and things of that nature. But you know, the mayor has been very, very, very strict on what he's trying to do.
But Bo, in terms of gang warfare, which is part of our 79% of our murders here, according to both the police and studies done by people like Professor Harriet, 79% of our murders here have to do with gang violence, gang upon gang. Are you having any of that in New York?
Yes, we're experiencing that here in the United States, in New York, actually. Just the other day in the Bronx, I saw where the DA, they made a big gang bust the other day in arresting about 22 young men who were involved in a huge gang in the Bronx that was responsible for a lot of crimes, you know, from drugs to, they're also saying murder. You know, so, and she's really stepping up on what she's trying to do, and she says there are many more gangs that she's going after. So they're making some steps and some strides here.
But that is from the law enforcement point of view.
Yes.
Do you know whether any effort is being made to get into some of those communities, you know, like the projects, to try and deal with the cause of the problem rather than the problem when it bursts out?
There are many programs here in New York City that are helping. You know, there are after-school programs, there are community programs, there are programs in the churches. You know, there are people, just individuals who go out in the community and, you know, try to reach out to many of the youths them in the community and talk to them. People who put together fun days and basketball games and, you know, sports events to try to keep some of the youths them from going in the wrong direction. And a lot of them are working. You know, maybe they need some more funding or some more highlight so that many more people can know about them. But there are a lot of programs like that here in New York City.
Well, maybe some of the people we have on the ground here who are beating their brains out, and some of them becoming quite frustrated. Maybe we need to put them on a plane and send them up there to go look and see what is being done up there and what is working.
You know, one of the programs that we have here at Irie Jam Radio is called the Irie Butterfly Foundation. It's a program that we do throughout the summer, which, you know, we reach out to the youths and, you know, the listeners of Irie Jam Radio. We encourage them to bring their kids, and they could drop them off during the day, and there's a lot of educational things that they do. They play games, they go on trips, things of that nature. You know, we provide food for them. And, you know, it's a learning experience right throughout the summer. It's called the Irie Butterfly Foundation.
Interesting.
So that's one of the ways that we try to reach out to the youths here in New York also.
Interesting. What's the weather like up there now?
We're in the 80s, in the low 80s. It's Memorial Day here in the United States, a very, very big holiday. So, you know, we're sending our shout-outs to all those who served in the military and actually lost their lives trying to fight for many freedoms for this country.
Yeah, well, our hurricane season starts on Wednesday. And we are told that we must look out. This year is likely to be more intense than normal. So like tell all the people I'm up there, say, but I get ready because I may have to send down some stuff to help us.
All right, sir, no problem.
All right, thank you very much. Beauregard. And
take care.
And my regards to all the Jamaicans up there.
I will.
Let's take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we've been discussing the issue of violent prevention. We have one of the highest murder rates in the world. But but interestingly, the police have said, and academic studies have confirmed, that most of the murders in Jamaica are related to gang warfare, gang feuds. As a matter of fact, a study that was done by Professor Anthony Harriott, who is our leading expert on these matters, measured that 79% of the murders, almost 8 out of every 10 murders, had to do with gang. Now, we had 1,437 murders, I think, last year. It means that out of that, about 300 of those murders, or put in another way, over 1,100 of those 1,400 and odd murders had to do with gangs, gang warfare. All the other murders, whether it is between two lovers or man hold you up and rob you and decide to kill you, all of those came up to about 300. 1,100 of the murders were gang related. Now, that provides us with at least some indication as to where we are to look to find the solution to the problem. And of course, part of the solution has to be that we have to find the gangs and dismantle them. So the police is going to have to be on the ball. They're going to have to make sure that their efforts are being driven by good intelligence and so on. But the problem with this, you see, is that as fast as you dismantle them, they grow back. So you have to dismantle, but you also have to make sure, you have to find a way to make a difference in the communities so that you don't dismantle a gang and another gang just spring up like Bahama grass. You have to find something, you have to do something in the communities. And somebody who has been, this is what we've been talking about today. And those listening to me will detect a great deal of frustration in my voice. I haven't given up entirely, but I'm also a pragmatist. And I'm prepared to declare that the effort that we have been making over the years, well-intentioned though many of those efforts are just not working. When I say they're not working, I don't say that they haven't had some positive effects in instances here and in instances there, but generally speaking, they are not producing the results that we want. Certainly not at the rate that we want. And someone who has been involved in some of these efforts, and I'm pleased to welcome him to the program. I'm talking about the Reverend Conrad Pitkin, who wears many hats. He's a bishop of the church. He's a custos of St. James, but he has also been involved in a lot of these efforts at, social intervention, community engagement, alternative dispute resolution, things like that. Costas Bishop Pitkin, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Golding, and good afternoon to your listeners.
I want you to help me because I was saying to Pastor Richard Keene, who was on before we took the break, and perhaps I'm simply reflecting my frustration. I'm wondering whether we don't have to just write off this generation and say, no, look, those children who are to be born at Cornwall Regional today and hereafter, we have to find a pathway for them that will make sure that they grow up in a completely different kind of mental environment. One in which from an early age at home, at school, in the church, they have an entrenched, instituted sense of right and wrong, that they are ambitious in terms of looking ahead to a productive life and are prepared to work hard and to study. Just trying to see if we can create a whole new generation of Jamaicans. Is it as bad as that? Or am I crazy?
Well, my grandmother used to tell me as a child, I grew with, while there is life, there is hope. And the scenario is, even if you write all this present generation, they are going to be around to influence the one that are coming up. And from the church perspective, we are strong believers in redemption. And so we will go to the very last to see how many can be redeemed from this present generation. The question should be, are we doing the right thing, or are we doing things right?
Talk to me about that, because you've been on the ground, you've been involved.
For quite a number of years. And I do believe that millions of dollars have been spent in social intervention. The outcome is another matter. Have we seen the outcome from the kind of expenditure that we are putting? So, are we doing...
What are your observations in St. James?
In St. James, my observation is that while there are several institutions, NGOs, and government agencies that are working on the ground, they're all doing their own thing. There's a lack of collaboration. There's a lack of working together to ensure that we get the right outcome from what we're doing. And whatever social intervention that there is or there are, there must be some components that are vital, such as values and attitude, conflict resolution, instructing and helping persons to resolve their conflict. I heard you mention the amount of persons who are killed by gang violence, but there's another vast amount that are being killed through domestic violence, where persons have not learned the skill of resolving their conflict rather than going to the cutlass, the knife, or the gun. And you're a man of vast experience, and you know too that you would have heard in certain instances, we knew that this was going to happen. We saw the signs. And it begs the question, if you saw the sign, if you knew it was going to happen, why didn't you do something to make corrective measures or to prevent where it can be prevented? Because no amount of social intervention, unless we can capture the vulnerable students that are leaving school in the thousands without the prerequisite to go on. They have one or two CXC subjects, or maybe three. They do not have enough to matriculate them further. They don't have the wherewithal from their parental background to help to finance them to go further. And so they become vulnerable to be influenced in a negative way. Whereas we need to be able to find a way to give these young persons leaving high school a skill so that they can go out and master and manage their own lives.
But part of the problem, Costas, and I made reference to it before, there is a colleague of mine, member of parliament, when I was in active politics, who told me that he had made considerable effort to establish a skills training center in his constituency. Got one built at great cost with really fabulous machines and 12 instructors. And he said after it was completed and opened, it sat there for 3 months and only 2 students enrolled. They weren't interested in that. This business of becoming a plumber or electrician or a welder didn't appeal to them because evidently there were other opportunities that they felt were available that were far more lucrative. Part of our problem now, is that I don't know what kind of training or what kind of job you can offer somebody that is going to enable him at the age of 21 to drive a brand new BMW. And these allures didn't exist 30, 40 years ago, no? So maybe the government going to have to find a way to make scamming so difficult, using technology, whatever. Because no peace management initiative is ever going to be able to say, don't go and scam. Come and learn carpentry or learn tailoring. Because you can earn a living that way. Them going to run you away. Right? So these are some of the challenges that we face today.
You say 21, but I would go lower than 21.
Well, there you have it.
And you're correct. That's why I mentioned values and attitude, because our value system has fallen so low because of, in some cases, lack of proper parenting. In other cases, these young persons, and I won't say young boys because female are a part of it too, these young persons find themselves in this kind of environment where they are able now to earn the kind of money that no skills, no trade could give them in 2, 3 to 6 months, and they can earn that in a week or maybe in one day. That's part of where the challenge lies. So how do we instill the right moral values in these persons? Eventually, you're either going to be killed, you're going to be arrested, or you're going to go to prison.
But how fertile
Even if you
is it?
have the funds in the bank, it's not going to help you.
How fertile is the ground for that?
I
remember you saying to me one time, that what about they preach to him about him not for rob place. Him say, I have 5 youth. Me not 30 yet, me have 5 youth. And whatever me I do for them, me have to do it now because me know me not live to reach 30. I mean, in other words, you talk about values and attitude, you see the value he put on his own life. He says he knows he's not going to live to see 30. So whatever I'm doing for the 5 youth, I'm have to do it now. How do you break through that kind of thinking?
There is a way to have it done, and it has to be gentle probing and showing that you don't have to die at 25, because that's the age limit that they have put on themselves now. I am going to go out at 25, so why bother? Let's live the fast life and go. But there is a way, and from our church Christian perspective, we have been able to pull quite a number out of that system and have shown them a better way. Not able to give them the money, but you are able to show them a better life.
But Costas, I'm looking at the crime statistics that the police put out last week. Up to the 27th of May, which would have been last week, Friday, I believe. 27th of May, 594 murders committed. Of that 594, you're not going to be happy to hear that 101 is in St. James. Matter of fact, St. James has the highest. Next to St. James is Westmoreland with 61. But St. James is way out front, 101. Yeah. What is happening in St. James?
Because I think we all know there is the challenge we have here with the gangs and the scamming.
I would have thought, well, I don't know. I would have thought that with the kind of tourism boom that we've been having, that, and it has spin-off effects, no? So that when tourism is doing well, local hairdresser is doing well too. I would have thought that the lure into criminal activity would not be as intense, but I'm no sociologist, so maybe I'm making some wrong assumptions.
But it comes back to the same thing you mentioned. Even if they have a job in the tourist industry, it doesn't pay the kind of return that they get from the illegal trade.
Well, I have some strong views on the scamming business. In the same way that I have some strong views on the drug business. I used to tell the Americans when I was in office, I said, look, we're doing our best to stamp out the drugs. But you also have to do something to prevent the drugs from entering your country, because it's your people them smoking it, it's your people them sniffing the cocaine, right? And you take all this scamming business. America needs to do more to alert their people. When you get these crazy calls, whether they come from Jamaica or come from Nigeria, when you get these crazy calls that tell you about how much lotto you win, slam down the phone or report the number to us or something. They're not doing anything. It's their people that are being fleeced. I'm not seeking to excuse our criminals. We need to try and find them and lock them up for a long time. But too often, America is allowing us to fight this battle alone. The hundreds of guns that come in illegally into Jamaica each year, where do you think they come from? Not from the same shop that this crazy youth who killed off the 19 children in Texas last year. The same kind of shop, and people go and buy them. But buying the guns is easy. The only problem they have is how to get it into Jamaica. Whether by boat or through, or hide it in some barrel or something.
Is it a fact that everybody wants to get rich?
Yes.
And that's the bottom line. Comes back to value.
Yeah, but
so if I get a call about me winning a
a society has a duty. You see, a society has a duty to make it as difficult as possible for you to get rich the illegal way, as easy as possible for you to try and get maybe not as rich, but for you to be able to live a reasonable life the legal way. That's a duty that the society has. And we have to continue. And people like yourself, we need to encourage you to not to become frustrated, because if I were doing what you are doing, I would have probably, washed my hands of it a long time and said, no, this don't make no sense. But you have to keep doing what we're doing. You made an important point, and it's something that I spoke of when I had Pastor Keane on the show. And that is that we can't fight this problem if each of us is determined to stay in our own little lane. We're going to have to find a way to integrate the efforts of the government, and by government I mean government opposition, the whole apparatus of government, the church, the communities, the schools, the youth clubs, every institution, every community organization, every element that can have some impact on the thinking of people in these communities. They all need to be, we don't have to be doing the same thing, but we must know what we're doing, and I must know how what you are doing is enhancing what I am doing. You understand what I'm saying?
It has to be that way. It has to be when we have a football match, we somewhere, not at the beginning either, either in the middle of the, before we finish, but you're having a double at the end of the first one. There is going to be a 45-minute session on conflict resolution or on values, and you find a way to infuse it, but it can't be just that you meet and you play football and you send the boys home, because sports alone is not going to do it. It will prevent them for the 2 or 3 hours they're on the field. But when they go back home, they go back into the same environment. It has to be more than just sports. It has to be more than just the skills. They come in and you teach them a skill, whether that be customer service, whether that be carpentry. We must have there an hour or two. One is going to deal with conflict resolution, and the other one's going to deal with values.
Well,
and not just teaching the skill and send them home. They go back to the same environment, they go back to the same situation they're in, and there's no help. We must find a way to do this. And 150%, the groups that are on the ground need to work together and stop jostling to get the publicity.
Is the Peace Management Initiative still active in St. James?
Yeah, it is still active. However, not, I think, in another form now. I'm no longer on that board, but I know the persons are here and they are still on the ground.
Yes, and when I had Mr. Peel from the USAID, he told me that he was in Salt Spring yesterday.
Well, a lot of things happening in Salt Spring.
Mm. Well, I'm glad to hear that, and please don't be discouraged by my own cynicism, no?
No, sir. I cannot be, because if I am able to influence one young person, that's a sense of satisfaction for me. That's one I'm taking out of a gang. That's one I am taking out of the vulnerability that he or she might be in, and I move on. That gives me the courage to go on.
Tell me, you made a comment there that I wanted to pick up on. Things like scamming. To what extent are young women involved in it?
I can't tell you to the extent, but I know both male and female are involved. It's not just male alone, so we should not just point fingers at the male.
And in terms of other crimes, I mean, as Costas, I'm sure you work with the police.
Very close.
Do young women figure any significant way in the other areas of crime?
Not really. We have not seen it. We have seen more young men involved.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Bishop, thank you very much for coming on today.
And thank you for having me, and all the best. And in your program, wish you all the success.
Good. Thank you so much.
Blessings.
Okay, we've been talking about violence prevention today. We had Mr. Paul Teeple from the USAID, and then we had Mr. Horace Levy, a well-known human rights activist who has been very, very involved in this effort, particularly at the community level. And then, of course, we spoke with Pastor Richard Keane, who is a member of the Peace Management Initiative and a pastor. And then we just had on Costas Conrad Pitkin, who is the Costas of St. James. He's the bishop as well, and also very involved in this kind of effort. This is not a discussion that allows us to come to some sort of conclusion. I believe that there are some things that we can draw from the discussion that we have had. One is we're going to have to continue the efforts at violence prevention, alternate dispute resolution, community engagement, all of that. Importantly, there needs to be greater coordination in the efforts of the various agencies. Government, churches, civil society, because it seems from the discussion that we have had that a lot of people are doing their own thing and doing it with the best of intentions, but it's not coming together to maximize the effectiveness of it. And then, of course, is the whole question of where it all begins. Any child that is born today, whether at Victoria Jubilee or up at Cornwall Regional Hospital, that child comes into this world with a brain, with a potential to be anything, to be the best that a human being can be. it all depends on what happens to that brain and what happens to that child in the environment in which it finds itself. And we perhaps need to start focusing some more. Call it values and attitudes if you will. Call it parenting if you will. But I think we really need to start taking a serious look at how can we ensure that that youngster, that baby doesn't grow up in an environment that pulls them towards the lot of scamming or pulls them towards the gangs or pulls them towards the gun. It's frightening, when you have a 10-year-old boy who, when you ask him quietly, what would you like to have? What would you like to own? He'll not tell you a bicycle, I want a gun. Because if he have a gun, him is the baddest man around town. No other boy can mess with him. But that's the environment in which he's growing up. And that is the gang leader you're looking at of 10 years down the road. So what I'm saying is that we've been making a lot of effort, we've been spending a lot of resources, we've been devoting a lot of energy, but somehow it's not hanging right and it's not delivering the results that we want. We perhaps need to spend some time, maybe just relax a little bit, back off a little bit, sit down and say, hey, let us all come together around a table. Let us look at our experiences. Let us look at what happens in other countries and how it works. Let us identify what are the peculiarities of our own situation that for which we can't find no examples anywhere. But let us find a way to be more effective in what we're trying to do. Because we can't continue like this. We're going 600 murders almost, and 5 months of the year don't finish yet. And that is where we are. Violence prevention, that's what we've been talking about today. I'll be back next week, God willing. We're going to talk about something else next week. We find something else to talk about. We try to select topics that we think are important to the country and topics that we feel will engage your own mind and your own thoughts. So thank you very much. Thanks to my producer, thanks to my sound engineer, thanks Beauregard, who anchors up there. We'll see you all next week, Monday.